Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 106 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with director Chris Dowling. Chris's new film, Run the Race, tells the inspiring story of a teen battling back from much more than just a life-changing injury. The film has a very special set of brothers behind the scenes, a duo whose sports background speaks for itself. This week's show is sponsored by Speakeasy Ideas. Now here's a message for homeschooling families from Dr. Thomas Kranowiter, president of Speakeasy Ideas. You know, freedom is never more than one generation away from being lost, depending largely on how free citizens educate their children. And while we have no shortage of problems in the world today, the future is brighter and more hopeful due to the good work to which you've dedicated yourselves, teaching your kids. Speakeasy Ideas wants to be your partner for homeschool civic education. That's why we've introduced a new online civics course titled The Political Science of the American Founding. This course will help your student become prepared for the rights and duties of being a citizen by learning the political science behind the great American experiment in constitutional self-government. The political science of the American founding is the result of my scholarly research and writing, combined with years of experience teaching at American colleges like Claremont McKenna College, Hillsdale College, and George Mason University. The materials included in this course have been selected, arranged, and packaged to supplement all kinds of curricula. You can easily modify these materials to be used for many learning levels, from young kids to high schoolers. To learn more about the new online civics class for homeschoolers, I invite you to go to speakeasyideas.com/homeschool. That's speakeasyideas.com/homeschool. And congratulations to you and your homeschooling kids. And thanks again for your good work and your interest in a sound civic education. What did Nirvana sing during the grunge era? All apologies? Today we get no apologies from the stars that shine so brightly in Hollywood. Think back a few weeks on the Covington Kids story. A gaggle of stars came out on Twitter, on social media, and said these kids were just the worst. They all assumed the fake news was real. Now most of those kids weren't even 18 yet, and that didn't matter. The stars knew better and they targeted them on social media. They used their huge social media followings to attack kids, and they were dead wrong. Of all the stars that did it, Kathy Griffin must have been the worst. Yet, have any of these stars apologized for getting this so very wrong? Jamie Lee Curtis did, quickly too. But beyond her, anyone else? Well, it comes to mind when I was thinking about the Jussie Smollett case. It looks like the truth is finally starting to emerge. The gay black actor had claimed that he was attacked, called some horrible racial and homophobic slurs, and that the attackers said MAGA country as if they were Trump fans, doling out their revenge for who knows what, but just kind of embracing their hate. Well, the actor's story keeps on collapsing, and it was pretty shoddy to begin with. Turns out 2 Nigerian brothers are now in custody, and they may be involved with this situation. We don't quite know if it was a straight attack, if this was a planned situation. We don't know the whole story, but it's obvious what Smollett was saying isn't true. The actor's got a lot of explaining to do at this point. But of course, the usual suspects, namely Democrats in power, piled on both Trump and Trump supporters when the story first broke. It's as if they had learned nothing from the Covington situation. And a lot of celebrities did the same, including director Ava DuVernay. So what happens next? Do all those stars erase those tweets? Do they offer up a full mea culpa? I'm so sorry we jumped to conclusions yet again? Well, likely nothing will happen. I doubt any tweets will be erased. There's no apologizing when the media won't hold you accountable. And when famous web slinger once learned a hard truth, with great power comes great responsibility. It's not just a spidey slab of wisdom, it's really true. And it applies to stars with huge social media followings who use them in the wrong way. Now, if they don't apologize, and soon, they're absolutely misusing those powers.
I'm Patrick Corelchi.
And I'm Adriana Cortez, and we're the hosts of Red Pilled America, a new storytelling podcast.
Red Pilled America is not another talk show covering the day's news. We are all about telling stories. Stories Hollywood doesn't want you to hear. Stories the media mocks. Stories about everyday Americans that the elites ignore. You could think of Red Pilled America as audio documentaries, and we promise only one thing: the truth.
Visit the iHeartRadio app right now to listen to Red Pilled America.
Here's the hit tweet of the week. Former NBC personality Megyn Kelly recently called out Disney's connection to foul-mouthed comic Sarah Silverman. In a way, she's right, and Disney has plenty of toxic people on its payroll, apparently, including a Beauty and the Beast producer who said some horrible things about those Covington kids. One of the tweets involved a wood chipper, and he was forced to apologize. But these are liberal toxic people, of course, so no one really complains. Still, Silverman used that Megyn Kelly attack to, guess what? Savage Donald Trump. P.S. I'm more offended by a president who denies a real threat 97% of scientists beg him to take action on, while creating a fake threat out of at-risk brown people at the border. There's a lot to unpack there. Turns out Silverman is still clinging to that debunked 97% statistic. It's garbage. And I'm pretty sure those angel moms aren't worried about the color of an illegal immigrant's skin. They're just mourning the loss of their loved ones, but that doesn't seem to matter, Sarah Silverman.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. He still sleeps with the nightlight on.
My hit tip of the week is The Promise. This 2017 film was an absolute dud at the box office. But you know what? Anyone who misses old-school Hollywood epics really deserves to give this one a chance. The backstory here is the Armenian genocide, but the plot is involving a complicated love triangle which dovetails directly into that tragedy. The cast here is really good, including Christian Bale, Oscar Isaac, and Charlotte Debon. And the visuals are really impressive, and they're occasionally bleak, too. There's lots of dark stuff going on, but also natural beauty, too. Now, I think before you see, maybe you want to Google Armenian genocide, brush up on the history, and then watch the film, because I think you'll really get a better appreciation of it. But I think you could also watch it without it, and then kind of rush to Google and find out more and more. Pretty amazing story. Pretty tragic, obviously. Now, is The Promise as good as all those legendary Hollywood epics of yore? Absolutely not. It's not even close. But it's good, it's absorbing, it's well acted. And for those who miss that style of filmmaking, it's going to make you feel a bit nostalgic while being entertained at the same time. The Promise is available right now on Amazon Prime.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Now let's get to this week's HitCast interview. Chris Dowling started out as an actor in Hollywood, but quickly shifted to writing and directing. He previously made Where Hope Grows, an emotional tale of a Down syndrome man befriending a soul searching for the truth. Now Chris is behind a new film. It's called Run the Race. It's a Faith Kiss story produced by Tim and Robbie Tebow. Yeah, those Tebows. The film, out February 22nd, is the brothers' producing debut, and Chris details how they impacted the film behind the scenes, during filmmaking, and much more in the latest HitCast interview. Here's my chat with Chris Dowling. All right. Well, Chris, I understand you started out in Hollywood as an actor and kind of made the switch to being more of a writer-director. I was kind of curious, was that evolution sort of sudden? Did something kind of spark it? Or was it maybe just figuring out, hey, this is where you kind of need to be, want to be, and maybe where you were meant to be?
Funny enough, it's more of a de-evolution because I came out here and I wanted to write and ultimately direct. But, when you come out here, I think it's like the first thing everybody does is like, let's go get headshots and try to act. And so that just kind of happened quicker.
Gotcha.
And then to be honest with you, I was actually having some success and I was like, I don't really want to do this. And that's when I did, my first little short film. And then that kind of started happening the other film. So funny enough, it was actually, I kind of stumbled backwards into that and then realized, like you said, maybe it's like, because I was like, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. It's just, it wasn't, it's fun. I might do it again. Like if I make a movie and it's me and my buddies, but it's not something I'm like, you would want to pursue or anything.
Gotcha. Well, looking at Run the Race, it's a really ambitious film. It's inspiring. There's a lot of stuff going on for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, I think people can take away a lot from it on a lot of different levels. But if there is sort of a singular lesson or a singular takeaway, what do you want audiences to kind of walk away with?
I wanted to feel authentic. I wanted to feel like real people having real conversations. And I think that's what that's what gives you that affinity to the characters. And then again, like you said, it's layered. So it's like there's something for everyone in there, and we're all dealing with stuff. Especially, I'm a big fan of like Stand By Me is probably my favorite movie of all time. And like, I'm just a big fan of coming of age movies. And this to me feels like that, where it's this young guy and he's trying to figure out life. And I mean, shoot, I'm 41 years old. I'm still trying to figure out life, but But at 18, I was definitely in a weirder spot, and I think it's fun to watch his journey and watch it through the eyes of this brotherhood. We don't have a lot of good films, I think, from a drama standpoint about brothers, and I don't know why that is, but it feels like there's lots of other relationships that we'll see about, but brothers, I feel like there's not a lot of them, and so. So this was kind of special for me. I've got a brother who's like one of my best friend growing up, and so it really hit home.
It's a good point, and I'm just like mentally cycling back. I can't remember the last movie that had a similar dynamic with the brothers, but it certainly needed. And it's funny because the next question I wanted to ask you was about the authenticity of the small town feel that I think the movie really does capture well, because I think if you get that wrong, it just jumps out at you, and I don't think the movie does at all. How do you kind of bring that to the screen? I mean, I know it's partly the screenplay, it's partly the visual presentation, but talk about connecting with that part of the American story, because I think it's nice to see on the screen in such a fashion. Yeah,
well, thank you. And again, I think for any film I ever do, I mean, again, I'm probably going to murder the word authenticity throughout the whole thing, but I really want to feel authentic. And I think, like you said, it just feels so stagey if suddenly if you can't get these locations and so that it works. And then it's like, oh yeah, now I remember I'm watching a film. And then even beyond that, it's like, oh, I'm watching a low budget film, because at that point it really starts. I was having a conversation with another filmmaker, and it's like, if you have bad audio or, locations that don't make sense, it really gives it away and makes it feel like it's a low budget film, because it takes you out of the movie. And so to find this spot we found, which is awesome, because you write to it. So it's like we went and we looked. There's a city called Bessemer, and I had no idea, outside of Birmingham. And I mean, it's just been. It was apparently like in the 50s, it was like the Beverly Hills of Birmingham or something like that, where it was like, but it was this bustling like steel and train, and they had all this commerce. And I mean, everything has just gone away. And it's super. And in fact, they even told me that's I got. This is true. I didn't verify it or anything, but it was like one of the highest per capita murder rates in of small towns in America. But it's because there's just nothing there right now. Everything's shuttered. Things have just been abandoned. And so when we pulled up and found this area, and the city of Bessemer was awesome. Like, they couldn't have been better. The police were it got to the point where they just well, just drive around and tell us where you want to shoot. And so I was literally just driving around and going, oh, there's a spot. Guys, let's go set up this. I talked to my DP. We'd look at it and we'd be like, okay, let's put this scene here. Or, hey, we've got this crazy scene, right? I mean, a crazy area we can use. Let's get the production value out of it. Let's do it. And even better that, which is really crazy, is the opening kind of football montage stuff that happened.
Yep. We
actually had Bessemer Academy, which, God bless them, was already going to be our backdrop and already going to be our school's location setting. And they just happened to have a high school championship football game coming up the first day of our shooting. And I tell you what, I talked to Coach, and they were amazing. And they let me put my actors in uniform on the sidelines. They were letting my actors run in. When their team scored a touchdown, there's 800 people in the crowd. This is a huge game. My actors were running out and jumping on these guys, celebrating. I had my head coach, Michael T. Williamson, standing on the sideline barking at the real players out there playing. And we were shooting all this. I mean, it was probably super confusing and distracting. I had 4 camera crews going around. But so when you watch that, we actually, shot 3 hours of a real small town high school championship football game. So, I mean, talk about feeling authentic. It was crazy. And then, even so much so that their stud quarterback, who looked like my actor, I went up to Coach. I was like, hey man, I know I'm asking for a lot here, but, our character wears jersey number 2. your guy wears 10. You think we could switch him, coach, so I could use the footage from and he was like, I'll ask him to change. But that's the kind of access that they gave us. And they were so amazing about it. And honestly, we couldn't have made the film look like we did without the help of those guys. It was a true, true blessing.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Tebow brothers. Obviously, they're executive producers here. What do they bring to a project like this? Obviously, they're new to filmmaking. You're the veteran. But I imagine that Tim and Robbie, they have something kind of special about them. They just seem like really pretty great people. What kind of difference do they make to a production like Run the Race?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's the no-brainer answer is, I mean, Tim Tebow, the Tebow name is a brand in and of itself. It's trusted. It is, I mean, again, authentic. Like that guy is who he says he is, which, I mean, in this day and age, that's few and far between, even in the, conservative or faith space. Like it's, but he is who he says he is, and people trust him, people love him. And so immediately, that gives our film the face it needs, and the brand awareness, but also again the trust that these audiences know that they're going to see something that is going to be inspiring, and not going to be too cheesy, and so I think that is a huge part of that. And then the flip side is also Robbie, who's getting his feet wet and who's got he's a creative guy and got great ideas and big dreams and hopes of doing a lot of movies. Was watching him kind of come in and work through the process of being a producer for the first time and add value and really, and just, I mean, dude, be a joy. And he's become a good friend. And so I think it was, the 1-2 punch of like, I mean, Tim being the face of our movie and Robbie being kind of some of the engine that was pushing it.
Gotcha. And when you have people who are new to filmmaking, I imagine there's a learning curve, or I imagine there's, you kind of get up to speed. At the same time, I would think an outsider's perspective can be helpful for you as a filmmaker, almost like you're so in the moment that maybe having a different perspective helps things. Were there any sort of situations where that came into play at all, or that was a factor?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think, I guess I can only speak for myself, but and my, some of my friends that are directors in this kind of, but it's like, I think it should be a collaborative process anyways. And it's like, if somebody is sitting with me at Video Village, I don't care if you're the script supervisor or even a PA. I've had a PA tell me an idea and I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, we should use that. But it's like, I do think it should be, because I don't have a monopoly on good ideas, obviously. So it's like, I welcome any conversation. And so, especially like with some of the football stuff, like I grew up in Texas, I played all the sports, and I'm a football fan, but it's like, Robbie had some insight and some stuff, and that was very important to him. So it was like letting him have, a lot of runway and figuring out some of that stuff was cool. But I think so. But again, I think, I don't know. I mean, I understand people that are so protective of their movie they're making, but ultimately, I don't know, man. I love mining for good ideas. Now, again, as the process goes on and you've kind of caught your vision and stuff, like there can be too many cooks in the proverbial kitchen, which, like in this situation, we had a lot of people that were making decisions on this movie. So that can kind of get to a point where you're like, oh, it feels like, we're in a studio here and we've got to run through all these channels. And so that can be a frustrating process sometimes, but ultimately, the product ended up being awesome. And I think you welcome collaboration. It's the best way to get it done.
Run the Race has an alcoholic father figure. Your last film had a similar, Where Hope Grows also had a similar kind of, generally speaking, kind of flawed figure. Are these kind of parents intriguing to you as a storyteller, that, that often the kids have to kind of make way in the world where maybe their sort of home life wasn't ideal, wasn't perfect? I mean, just as a storyteller, can you talk about that perspective? It fascinates me, and I think it leads to pain, it leads to forgiveness, it leads to growth, and it leads to being stuck sometimes too.
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, it was the same alcoholic father figure. It was Chris Dowling playing both characters, which is hilarious. My dad just saw him on a Hallmark movie, and he was like, "Hey, call Dowling and tell him it's great to see him not drinking in one of his films." And I was like, so I called him and told him that. But I mean, you know what? As long as it's not played as a one-dimensional flat character. I mean, in Where Hope Grows, it was really important because it was a guy who was, he was getting ready to drink himself to death, and he'd given up on life. And the idea of that was like, what happens when that guy gets introduced to like the most basic childlike faith as an adult? So like that was the premise of setting him up there. And this one, I think, as long as we realize, and it's the audience gets to kind of catch up, I think, with it, is like when the mom dies, like, it doesn't just affect our boys and suddenly dad becomes a bad guy. Obviously he has issues, but I think there's a little bit that you start kind of feel. I mean, you're going to root for him, but ultimately, like, you have to feel for him too. Like, this guy lost his wife too, and he did not make the right choice. As he has kind of fallen away from the kids and is drinking and doing whatever. But ultimately, I think as long as they're not one-dimensional characters, I think there's something interesting about these guys that when they fall away, and it's prevalent, man. I mean, it's when you're giving up on stuff, you are doing stuff like just filling your time with drinking or drugs oftentimes. And I mean, it's not only that, but also, I think that's definitely a sign of things to happen, and it's something you can obviously play on film. That a lot of people have had situations like that. My grandfather was an alcoholic. And I've heard stories from my dad about what he went through as a kid. And I think that all that stuff plays in the back of your head when you're writing these characters. Yeah.
You're watching this particular figure, and then he says, I've spent 2 Christmases without my wife. And it's a really beautiful line, because it kind of puts a whole new spin on things and a whole new perspective on things. I wanted to touch briefly on Where Hope Grows. You worked with David DeSanctis, who is he has Down syndrome. And there's been so much talk about Hollywood and sort of being more open to different roles and different people, and maybe even disabled actors. What do you think you learned from that experience working with him? It sounds like it was a great one, but what would you tell other directors who maybe haven't worked with a non-traditional actor in a sense?
I mean, honestly, the biggest lesson was, and by the way, David now has become, I'm a very, very close friend. I love that guy. But ultimately, I think it is, you can't be afraid or question, or you can't doubt. Like, let them, don't put them in a box and go, just because somebody has Down syndrome, they won't be able to do this, especially if you've never met anyone with Down syndrome. Because even along the way with David was shocking me with the stuff he was doing and performances and stuff. And like I said, I'm still friends with him, very close. And he still says he's going to do something. And I go, David, I don't know if you should do that, or I don't think you're going to be able to do that one. And then he does it. And I tell him, I go, why do I keep still doubting you? Like, I don't get it. And so I think, but I think it's about embracing that. I mean, like, I think you have to go and reach and find people that are authentic to the part, and they can do it. And, and treat that was my biggest thing. Is like, when I was going to do Where Hope Grows, I was getting ready to go out there. I didn't know anybody with Down syndrome, but I had written this character, and I was about to go direct David for the first time. And, my wife was like, oh, well, you really need to be researching and studying and doing the stuff. And she's right in a lot of ways. But ultimately, I was like, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go out there. I'm going to treat him like a dude. And then if that doesn't work, plan B is I'm going to go, talk to Down syndrome in Louisville and really get a lot of help. But I went out there and I just started treating him like a dude. And next thing you know, he's treating me like a dude, and we're just, 2 fellows making a movie together. And it became so cool, and we trusted each other so much, and this amazing friendship came from all that. But and his performance was insane. Like, he's never acted before, and he crushed it. And it was so, I don't know, man, it was eye-opening. And it's actually propelled me in a way that before that I had no special needs charities, or that wasn't a thing that was really registering to me. But after that, now I'm involved with special needs organizations at my church. I'm in the special needs ministry. Like, it really has affected my life in that manner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Another obviously element of your film is faith and how it works with the story, works with the characters. When you're making a faith-based movie, or even pushing that label aside, what is the sort of the key thing you want to do and the key thing you want to avoid? Because it's obviously you don't want to preach, but it's an essential element here. Talk about sort of that balance as a filmmaker.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The faith-based isn't really a genre per se as much as it is a marketing box. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's even in the different films that deal with faith, I mean, you could really go across the board to like broader things like The Blind Side, where there's like Christian worldviews inside of a otherwise secular film, to the Kendrick brothers films that are, very message driven and made for the church audience, almost specifically and exclusively. And then there's this huge space in between. And so you got to know your audience. So you want to do things that don't offend your audience, necessarily, but at the same time, I personally don't want to pander to my audience or not give them enough credit. And so for me, for the films I want to make, I like faith to be a layer in there amongst other layers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's just for me, and specifically, that's what I like. There's a time and place for all the other kinds too, and those guys do great jobs with them and hit their markets, and they know their audience. But ultimately, for me personally, there's I would like to expand more out of that, and I've got some projects I'm working on now that are not specifically would not qualify as the quote unquote faith-based market. They wouldn't, it's not stuff, but ultimately have faith elements in them. So I personally want to push more into that space of like the secular, like, or whatever, just a movie. Like, it's just, that's my thing. It's like, it's just a good movie that deals with faith. Like, I mean, that's what I want. I don't want people to say that's a good faith-based movie. Like, it's a good movie and there's faith in it. Like, I'd much rather hear that. You know what I mean?
Yep. When you're working on a project like this, like a very good cast, I imagine people maybe more faithful, others maybe are more secular in their I guess their personal lives. Does that sort of help in a way to kind of have a range of experiences on the set, in the crew, when you're kind of telling the story, where maybe you can get different kinds of feedback? Or what's that like? If there's, I mean, I'm assuming there's not a unanimity of sort of approach in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, having different ideas and different beliefs in everything, in the character, I mean, in the actors, but also in the crew. Anything I write, I send over to my best friend, and he's agnostic, and I want my screenplays that are dealing with faith, but to still pass muster with him. Mm-hmm. He might not believe in the ultimate, message per se, but ultimately he can read it and go, oh, cool. And I'll find stuff that is attractive to him because, again, like, the faith market is very exclusive, and you kind of in a lot of ways, you already have to be on the team to enjoy a lot of the movies. But I want to be inclusive so I can, reach people like my best friend, who's like, cool, man. He's like, and he loves the movies. He shot Where Hope Grows with me. He's a DP, and now he's a very successful director. But like, it's like, so I need his input because I want to know what sparks in him. And, like he told me, he's like, a lot of these faith movies, he's like, it's, the opening is a guy who's walked away from his faith, or, quote unquote, backslid, or whatever the case may be. He's like, and then he gets a sermon, and then the third act is he goes back to it. He's like, if I've never had faith to begin with, so I can never fall away from it, he's like, I automatically don't associate with that character. I'm going to have a tough time wanting to even get to that second act. And it makes sense. Like, so it's like leaving some of it ambiguous, like we did in like Where Hope Grows, where it's like, you don't know his faith going into this. Did he have faith? Did he walk away from the faith? And I love giving the audience credit to that, because then the audience can make their own call on where the starting point is, and then they can go on that journey. And then without me having, without exposition and me having to dictate this is where you're at, they get to make it personal. And I think that goes a long way.
Gotcha. I imagine as a director, every time you do a project, you're learning, you're growing, you're kind of accepting different things and getting feedback. When you're shooting in a small American town and you're working with a really gifted cast like you have here, is there any sort of specific maybe takeaways or lessons from making Run the Race that you can kind of point to and say, hey, I think this is how I grew, or this is a great tip from an actor, or this was something that really touched me about the local people here that I'm going to kind of take away from this movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar because when we shot like Where Hope Grows was also in like Louisville, and we had some small town action that was really helpful and stuff. But I think like anything in every movie, when you're the director and it's, quote unquote, your set, I think a lot of it is also about managing personalities and people. And I think that is always a big growth space too, is trying to just figure out how to navigate through all that. So I feel like, I feel like I definitely learned some places in there, and I got to shoot with the new DP who has become a super close friend of mine, Chris Kimlin, who's shot amazing stuff before, and I'll use again. So like figuring out a working process with him where suddenly we were on the same page, the same way that me and my old DP best friend were, where I can just, it's like shorthand. Mm-hmm. Like that is something that had to happen quickly, and it did. So it's like learning the processes of that for sure. And then even that, Chris has a different shooting style than and it was trusting and getting on board with him, and and making a beautiful movie.
Gotcha. Before I let you go, any future projects that are either in development, sort of in your head maybe even closer to fruition that you can kind of talk about and maybe kind of tease a bit?
There's a lot. I don't know. I mean, there's some stuff that I actually don't know if I'm supposed to say things or not. To be honest with you, but I've got a pretty miraculous movie about a orphanage that basically wins one of the largest fishing tournaments in the world and beats out 900 of the top fishermen in the world to raise money to save their orphanage, which is a true story that is about to start shooting. And there's there's some fun things. I've got a horror film. We've got a docu-series. I've got another docu-series that will soon be coming out, and that I don't know. I guess I should really find out what I'm supposed to talk about before I start spouting off. But there's a lot that's happening right now. It's a very exciting time, and so I just feel I'm really grateful.
Suffice to say, you're busy, and will continue to be busy for the foreseeable future. But
yes.
Thank you, Chris, for joining the HiTcast. Please make a date to see Run the Race, opening February 22nd. All the best to you on the film and your future projects, and we'll hear about it more very soon.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate it, buddy.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.